If you are declaring war against these cartels and Congress is likely to approve of that process, why not just ask for a declaration of war?
Well, I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. Okay? We're going to kill them. You know, they're going to be like dead. Okay. Yeah.
It's Ken Harbaugh with the Midas Touch Network. This is insane. The President of the United States has declared without any debate, without consulting Congress, that drug cartels are waging war on America, and that by virtue of his powers as commander-in-chief, he has the unilateral ability to kill them without presenting evidence, without trial, without oversight of any kind from Congress. Remember, this is happening at the same time that the JAG Corps, those are the lawyers who advise military commanders on what is legal, the JAG Corps has been gutted, the Press Corps has been kicked out of the Pentagon, and the admiral in charge of the military aspect of these operations, in particular the attacks on supposed drug-running boats in the Caribbean, that admiral abruptly resigned. If you didn't see Bobby Jones's episode on that, check out the link below. It's worth it. These are unprecedented times. When it comes to the extra-legal use of military force and the president's usurpation of congressional authorities, I cannot think of anyone better equipped to help us understand the context and the gravity of what we're seeing than today's guest. Jake Tapper knows this terrain better than anyone. Here's our conversation. Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. My guest today is Jake Tapper. He's out with an incredible new book, which I have dog-eared the hell out of, Race Against Terror, about the pursuit of an al-Qaeda terrorist before he is set free. I'm sure this audience knows Jake from his time at CNN as a correspondent, now as an anchor. Jake, I know you as one of the exceedingly few journalists who has not only won the respect, but won the trust of soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines, because you've done the work, you've been downrange, you've been in the trenches, both metaphorically and literally, with the guys on the front line. So before we get into it, first of all, I want to say thank you for doing that, for doing the real hard work of journalism alongside the guys who are doing the nation's work downrange.
Well, thank you. It's literally the least I can do. I was in Cleveland, Ohio, Thursday night doing a book event for this book, which also tells the story of service members. And a guy from The Outpost, a book I wrote about Afghanistan in 2012, one of the soldiers, Zach Kopis, came and said to say hi, and that meant the world to me. Just the idea that, like, I'm in touch with a lot of these guys still, and you know, they're just the best. As I don't need to tell you or your listeners and viewers, they are the best people in the world. They are, you know, hardworking, decent Americans who, in many cases, are sent to do impossible jobs.
Yeah, and who volunteer for it. I mean, that was the thing that stood out about your profiles in The Outpost. I mean, I think a lot of people's understanding of the military doesn't get that part right. So much of the sacrifice is done out of love of country. That trust is being broken, it feels like, on a daily basis. And that's what I really want to talk to you about. We'll get to some of the particulars about the book, Race Against Terror. We'll make sure the link is in the show notes. But we're living through a time right now when that trust that you have so carefully cultivated and earned is being dismantled with every new pronouncement out of the Pentagon, with the dismantling of the Pentagon Press Corps, with the constant lying coming out of the Secretary of Defense and honestly from the White House itself. As a journalist, how do you adapt to this new reality? It's hard to be impartial, right?
Well, it's not hard to be impartial, but impartiality doesn't mean relinquishing standards. We are in a country that stands for freedom of speech and freedom of the press, and that is one of the values that men and women go and fight and die for. We're not fighting. I mean, we're very seldom fighting defensive wars for American land, you know, with the exception of Pearl Harbor or whatever. Like, generally speaking, we're fighting for our ideals, and those ideals are liberty and freedom. enshrined in our Constitution in a way that they are not in most countries. And I find it remarkable that, and it's not just the Pentagon. I mean, it is individuals in the Pentagon who are veterans and should know better. The idea that they are demanding that demanding that journalists who cover service members, who cover generals, who cover this $1 trillion a year government department, the Department of Defense or the Department of War, whatever you want to call it, the idea that you have to basically agree to a lesser First Amendment protection than those who do not get credentials, the idea that any solicitation, in their view, in their parlance, is viewed as a potential violation of the law. Even just putting for tips, on your Twitter page for tips, send tips here, even that act, like that is literally the opposite of what our service members fight for. And by the way, journalists are one of the few checks on the Pentagon. They're not, and when I say Pentagon, I don't mean soldiers. I mean they're one of the few checks on the decisions and to send men into harm's way, to waste money, to be corrupt. All the things that happen at the Pentagon. We're one of the few checks because very seldom is the legislative branch willing to take on the Pentagon. And again, when I'm talking about contractors and generals and admirals, I'm not talking about service members doing their duty. So it's really quite contrary to American values.
And it cannot be a coincidence that this is happening at the same time that our military is blowing boats out of the water without any accounting to Congress, without any evidence being provided to the American people. I'm talking about the fast boats in the Caribbean. That has now moved to the Eastern Pacific on the other side of Venezuela. It feels like they almost wanted this mass exodus from the Pentagon because they don't want the oversight. It's not like they're trying to walk the policy back.
Well, and they're not just kicking out journalists who, refuse to comply with these ridiculous orders. And I should note, it's not just legacy media like CNN, the New York Times, Washington Post refusing to comply to these rules. It's right-leaning media also. It's Fox, it's the Washington Times. I mean, there are conservative outlets that are refusing to do this as well. But Hegseth is also trying to cut off congressional relationships with people in the Pentagon. He's trying to stop the flow of information. And I don't know if it's related to anything particular, whether the 10th boat that was just fired out of the water by the U.S. military, or sending U.S. troops to cities to do whatever they're being sent there to do, protecting ICE agents or whatever. But it is certainly at a time when there needs to be scrutiny. And look, this isn't partisan. This has nothing to do with Donald Trump. We would all be objecting to these rules if they were being pushed by a Democrat. And I should also note, thank God that the journalists were there covering the disaster that was our withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 and calling a spade and saying, this is what it is. And the idea that we're being told not by the Pentagon, because they barely do any press conferences, but we're told by the Republicans in Congress when I ask them about this, and there are exceptions, of course, like Rand Paul of Kentucky, but we're being told the military intelligence is 100% correct, et cetera, et cetera. There's no such thing as 100% correct, and the guys who got stuff wrong. And always they're trying to do their best, whatever. Intelligence is it's impossible to always be right. But the guys who got wrong that Afghan family that was killed by the U.S. after the withdrawal are the same people who are making these assessments about this is definitely a narco-terrorist boat. And there's no 100%. So, yes, I agree with you completely. There needs to be oversight. There needs to be accountability. And journalists are part of that as enshrined in the Constitution. I mean, Thomas Jefferson said that if he was given a choice between a government or a newspaper, he'd go with the newspaper.
Yep. Government without newspaper or newspapers without government. He'd pick the newspaper every time. Hey everyone, it's Ken. Quick break here to say thanks for watching and a huge shout out to everyone who supported my most recent reporting trip to Ukraine. I hope you followed the updates on Substack. I reported from Chernobyl, from Kyiv and Odessa, and from frontline positions alongside some of the bravest people I have ever met. If you haven't yet signed up for my Substack, please check it out. It's free to join. The link's below. Thanks. As a former intel guy, anytime I hear the government say they're 100% confident about something, I know someone's lying, right?
It just doesn't exist. There's not, you don't have, I mean, we have a saying in journalism, if your mother says she loves you, get a second source. Like there is no such thing as 100% in intelligence. It just does not exist in intelligence. Like, I mean, obviously in kinetic operations, a guy's coming at you with a gun. Yeah. That's a guy coming at you with a gun. You know what's going on. But yeah, no, I mean, it doesn't exist. And the idea that there are, I mean, look, we know what happened when the Defense Intelligence Agency gave their report, gave their assessment after the strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, which was that they were not completely destroyed. And CNN broke that story, Natasha Bertrand. And the White House started railing against Natasha, who's a great reporter. B, they fired the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency before long. I mean, this is all what it's about. They don't want anything that is contrary to the narrative. And it's very disappointing. I can't say it's a surprise because this is how governments behave. But it's very disappointing because, the Trump administration made a lot of plans, made a lot of promises about how they were going to be different from previous administrations. In a lot of ways, they're just not. It's the exact opposite. They're bad, just they're even worse in some ways. Like we were lied to about the Afghanistan withdrawal. I mean, that by the Biden administration. Period. We were lied to. Why would we think that the solution to what was wrong in the Biden administration is more secrecy?
Right, and it's not just disappointing. It's dangerous.
Yeah.
And I feel like we've gotten lucky up until this point that we haven't faced the kind of threat, the kind of challenge that would really test the IC, the intelligence community, the professionalism of the investigators and the prosecutors. But this brings us back to the book, right? The successful pursuit and defense of America against these kinds of threats requires a level of dedication and professionalism that I feel like is not just being neglected, it's being eviscerated. When you look at what Lindsay Halligan is being tasked with and the exposure the American people now have to the kinds of threats that this government doesn't seem to be able to meet.
So, just for your viewers and listeners, just a brief synopsis of what the book's about. The book is about an al-Qaeda terrorist named Spingool. It's a true story. He's picked up by the Italians during the Arab Spring. He confesses to having killed Americans in Afghanistan and having tried to blow up the U.S. Embassy in Nigeria. The Italians call the Americans. The Americans come over to Italy, hear his confession, and the Italians are like, great, take him. And the Americans can't take him because it's the Obama era. They have to build a case that they can bring in a criminal court. And Spingool is the first and to this day only foreign terrorist tried in a U.S. criminal court for killing service members in a war zone. And the book goes into who these service members are, tells the story of these brave fighting men and women at Firebase Shkin in 2003. So that part, there's a big military component of this. But there's also this legal component. And as you note, this is not an easy thing to do, to prosecute somebody for killing Americans on a battlefield in 2003. In 2000, the trial takes place in 2017 in Brooklyn. So we're talking about 14 years later. They're trying to prove a case. And it's not easy. The book is mainly about the sleuthing and the investigative work and all that fun detective stuff. But one of the things I learned, and I think the reader will see, is this is tough. This is difficult stuff to prove. So one of the things I learned is the degree to which this is incredibly difficult, and also some of the people involved in the Justice Department and the FBI who are really good at this. One of those guys in the book was a guy named George Toscas. George Toscas was like the toughest guy at the National Security Division of the Justice Department. He was the one that you had to get everything approved to get, he was the tough hurdle to get an indictment, to get an extradition. He was the tough one. After Toscas signed off on it, the Attorney General or President Obama, that was relatively easy. Toscas was the tough one. And I should also note, Toscas has never communicated with me in any way. He did not cooperate with this book. And this is not me repaying him for kindnesses. I wish he had shown me any kindness. He has not. But I also just know how good he was from his colleagues talking about him. Toscas is no longer in the job because Toscas signed off on the Mar-a-Lago classified document search warrant. And after Trump took office earlier this year, Toscas was sidelined and basically, shown the door. That makes us less safe. Now, one thing that Trump is doing that is interesting that I think is a positive development is his administration is trying to bring the second foreign terrorist before a U.S. criminal court for killing service members abroad. And that is this guy, Jafar, who was one of the people behind the Abbey Gate bombing. And he's right now just a couple miles away from where I'm sitting in D.C. He's in Virginia awaiting trial. I think that's a positive development because I think what Obama did, and it also took place during the first Trump administration, to lock up Spin-Ghoul ultimately made us much safer because that guy's just like taken off the battlefield like a pawn in a chessboard. He's gone. And if he'd been sent to Gitmo, who knows? He probably would have been freed at some point. But Jafar, the problem with what's going on with Jafar is, again, this disrespect of expertise and overemphasis on loyalty to Trump. Because the acting U.S. attorney of the Eastern District of Virginia, a guy named Eric Siebert, he was fired by Trump because he wouldn't go ahead with the Comey prosecution. And the prosecutor, the assistant U.S. attorney, a guy named Michael Ben-Ari, he was also fired just a few weeks ago because some person on Twitter speculated that he probably also opposed the Comey indictment. No truth to that.
With no evidence.
No evidence, not even presented as if there were evidence, just presented as speculation. He was fired, and he in a public letter said, this hurts the prosecution of Jafar and the ability to get justice for these 13 American families that were killed, the service members killed at Abbey Gate. And the current leadership of the Justice Department is more focused on going after the president's perceived political enemies than they are in protecting the American people. That is a stark thing for an assistant U.S. attorney to say. And I think it gets at all the same problem, which is loyalty to Trump, owning the libs, revenge, instead of the basic functions of government, protecting the American people. That's the number one job of a president, is to protect the American people.
That was part one of my conversation with Jake Tapper. In part two, out tomorrow, we dive into Congress's culpability in abdicating its Article I responsibilities over the course of multiple administrations. And we also get into a back and forth about the responsibility of the media to meet this moment. It's a great second half to this conversation. See you then.